I turned my anger into a down payment. My first tenant was the last person on earth I expected to see walking through that door. I have a post-it note on my bathroom mirror. It says $318,000. That's not a goal. That's not a savings target or a dream or an aspiration board cut from a magazine. That's a loss. That's 17 years of rent checks written to other people. 6 apartments, for cities, 3 states, 1 Tuesday night with insomnia and a spreadsheet and a growing, nauseating sense that I had been very productively funding someone else's retirement for nearly 2 decades. I wrote the number down at 2:14 in the morning. I taped it to the mirror. I looked at it the next morning while I brushed my teeth and I felt something shift inside me. Not inspiration exactly, more like the specific anger that comes when you finally understand how something works and realize you've been on the wrong side of it for a long time. I was 37 years old. I had rented my entire adult life. I had $0 in property. I had $0 in equity. I had $318,000, written in black Sharpie on a yellow post-it, that had passed through my hands and into other people's mortgages, 1 month at a time, since I was 21 years old. That's the beginning. Here's what came before it. Background, the job, the meeting, the parking garage. 9 years. That's how long I worked at the logistics company. Senior operations manager. I ran a team of 11 people, managed regional carrier relationships, kept on-time delivery rates above 94% for 6 consecutive quarters. I was good at my job in the way that people who are actually good at their jobs are good, quietly, consistently, without needing much recognition for it. My performance reviews used words like reliable and detail-oriented and strong team culture. I got a 4.1% raise in year 7. I liked most of my colleagues. I had a routine that worked. I thought I was building something. Then a new VP came in. He was 52. He'd been brought in from outside, some larger firm in the southeast where he'd run a bigger division. He arrived in October with a mandate to restructure operations and a certainty about things that I now recognize as the particular confidence of someone who doesn't yet know what they don't know about a place. He spent 3 months restructuring. I watched layers get consolidated, titles get reshuffled, reporting lines get redrawn. I thought I was fine. My numbers were fine. My team liked me. That's supposed to matter. The meeting lasted 11 minutes. He shook my hand at the beginning. He said, "This isn't about performance. And I want to note for the record that when someone says that to you while handing you a severance packet, it does not help as much as they seem to think it does." He explained that my role was being eliminated as part of a broader structural realignment. He used the word realignment 3 times. I counted. I was counting things because I wasn't able to do anything else. He shook my hand again at the end. The whole thing was professional, efficient, and completely devastating in the way that clean processes can be devastating, not because of cruelty, but because of how little room there was in it for the fact that I was a person who had given 9 years to that place. I drove home. I pulled into the parking garage of my apartment building, and I sat in my car for 45 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel thinking about the geometry of what had just happened, how you can do everything right and still have it end in 11 minutes because someone above you decided the structure needed to change. Then I went upstairs and paid my $1,640 monthly rent 3 days early. Because I was scared. Because losing the job meant losing income, meant potentially losing the apartment, and whatever else I was feeling in that moment, the rent was something I could control. So I controlled it. That's what it feels like to rent your whole life. You're always 3 days early on the check because the alternative is too frightening to sit with. The 8 months. Building the foundation. I got a new job 7 months later. Same industry, smaller company, less prestige, $71,000 a year, which was actually more than I'd been making at the end, so that was something. I kept my lifestyle exactly where it had been at $64,000. Same apartment, same grocery store, same nothing fancy existence. I put the difference in a savings account that I did not look at for emotional reasons. What I did instead of looking at the savings account was study real estate. Not casually. I need to be honest about that because people say they're studying something when they mean they watched 2 YouTube videos and downloaded a podcast app. I read 4 books cover to cover, the kind with actual math in them. I took a 12-week online course on residential real estate investing. I built spreadsheets, 64 of them, I still have the folder, modeling cash flow on every type of residential property in every Cincinnati zip code. I learned what cap rates mean and why they matter and when to trust them and when they're lying to you. I learned what house hacking is and why more people don't do it, and the answer is mostly psychological. I listened to a real estate investing podcast during every commute. This is 40 minutes a day. For 14 months. That's a lot of other people's experiences absorbed while sitting in Ohio traffic, and I want to say, It was worth every minute, because what I was really doing was building a model in my head of how this works, not the theory of it, but the texture of it. The things that go wrong. The things landlords get wrong that they don't have to. The decisions that look like they save money in the short term and cost twice as much in the long term. I was learning to be the landlord I always wanted to have. 14 months after the firing, I had $44,000 saved. I started looking at properties. The building, North Side, Cincinnati. I want to tell you about the building because the building matters. 4 units. Built in 1924, which in Cincinnati's North Side neighborhood means brick exterior, hardwood floors, high ceilings, good bones, and a list of maintenance needs that requires careful inspection and honest accounting. The current owner was 71 years old and moving to Florida, which meant he wanted a clean transaction more than he wanted to squeeze every dollar out of the listing price. He'd priced it at $310,000 knowing someone would offer less. I offered $295,000. He accepted in 48 hours. 2 two-bedroom units. 2 one-bedrooms. 2 occupied, 2 vacant. Unit 1, 2-bedroom, ground floor. Occupied. Tenant named Patricia, been there 6 years, pays $950 a month, below market, but Patricia is 63 years old. She's been there since before the previous owner bought it. She shovels the walk in winter without being asked and slides notes under the management door when she notices something needs attention. I did not raise her rent. I want to be clear about that. I could have. Market rate for that unit was $1,250. I didn't, because Patricia is the kind of tenant that holds a building together, and everyone who has ever owned a building knows what I mean. Unit 3, 1 bedroom, 2nd floor. Occupied. Tenant named Marcus, been there 4 years, pays $780 a month, same situation, loyal, careful, communicative, slightly below market. I left his rent alone too. Units 2 and 4 were vacant. I listed them both at market rate. $1,250 for the 2-bedroom, $975 for the 1-bedroom. Here's the part one haven't mentioned yet. I moved into Unit 1. No, not Patricia's unit. I mean I bought a 4-unit building and I moved into it. This is called house hacking, and I want to spend a moment on it because the real estate podcasts talk about it constantly, and in my experience most people hear about it and then decide it's not for them without really sitting with the math. The math. My mortgage was $1,891 a month. Patricia paid $950. Marcus paid $780. That's $1,730 from 2 tenants before I filled the vacant units. I was covering 91% of my mortgage payment by living in the building I owned. When I filled the other 2 units, I went cash flow positive. I was 38 years old and I had gone from paying $1,640 a month for someone else's asset to living in my own building while the other tenants covered most of my carrying costs. The post-it note on my bathroom mirror started to look different. I listed units 2 and 4. 22 applications in 10 days. I ran credit checks, verified income, called previous landlords. I screened carefully because the building I'd always wanted to live in was one where the landlord screened carefully. I narrowed to 6 finalists. Scheduled showings. Update 1. The Tuesday afternoon. I was showing Unit 2 on a Tuesday in October. He was my 4th applicant of the day. I'd shown the unit to a young couple that morning, both teachers, solid income, good references. Then a single woman in her 40s relocating for work. Then a recent grad with a cosigner. I had gone back upstairs between showings, done some paperwork, come back down. I heard footsteps on the stairs. The door to Unit 2 opened. The man who walked in was holding a printed copy of my rental listing. He was wearing a good coat, not expensive, but well-maintained. His hair was more gray than I remembered. He looked like a man who had been through something and was managing it competently, which I would later understand was an accurate red. He looked at me. I looked at him. 3 seconds of complete silence. He said, "You're the landlord." I said, "You're the applicant." This is the part that people want to be a movie. They want there to be swelling music, or a monologue, or some expression of visible triumph on my face. I want to tell you what it actually felt like. Strange. Not satisfying, not yet, just strange. Like the geometry of something clicking into a shape you didn't plan for. He was the VP who had fired me. He was standing in my 2-bedroom rental unit on the 2nd floor of a building I owned. He had a printed listing in his hand. I had his rental application in my office upstairs. I showed him the unit. I did not bring up the 11-minute meeting. He did not bring up the 11-minute meeting. We walked through the kitchen, the bathroom, the bedrooms. I answered his questions. Yes, laundry is on site. Yes, heat is gas. Yes, street parking, the lot behind the building is first come for tenants. Professional. Measured. He said he'd think about it. I said I'd be in touch after reviewing all applications. He walked down the stairs. I stood in Unit 2 for about 4 minutes, looking out the window at the street below, watching him get into a car that was noticeably more modest than the one I remembered him driving 9 years ago. Then I went upstairs and pulled his application. Credit score, 701. Income, consulting, variable, sufficient with his daughter as co-signer. Rental history, clean, 14 years of homeownership, no evictions, no late payments. He'd listed his reason for moving, relocating to Cincinnati to be closer to family. I read between those lines easily enough. Update 2, the 3 days. I need to tell you about those 3 days because they're the part of this story I think about most. I had 5 other applicants for Unit 2. 2 of them were objectively stronger, higher credit scores, more stable documented income, simpler situations. The right financial decision was not complicated. I knew what it was. I could have made it that same night and moved on. I didn't. Not because I was going to do the wrong thing, but because I needed to understand what the right thing actually was before I did it. I thought about the 11-minute meeting. I thought about the parking garage. I thought about the $318,000 on my bathroom mirror and what that number represented. Not just money, but years and choices, and the specific texture of insecurity that comes from never owning the place where you sleep. I thought about what I would do to him if I rejected his application. Not physically, I mean the act of rejection itself. I'd be within my rights. He wasn't the strongest applicant. I could cite the numbers and sleep fine and feel a particular satisfaction that would probably last about a week before it curdled into something I didn't want to be carrying around. I thought about the version of me that would do that. I didn't like him very much. He felt good in the moment and small in the long run. He was the kind of person who makes decisions based on what he can take rather than what he wants to build. I thought about what I wanted to build. I wanted to build a building where the landlord fixed things and answered calls and treated tenants like people. I wanted to be the kind of owner I'd spent 17 years wishing I had. That was the whole point. That was why I read 4 books and built 64 spreadsheets and moved into a 1924 brick building in Northside, because I had a vision of what it should look like from the other side of that relationship, and I wanted to live it. You can't be that landlord and also be the guy who uses a lease application as a personal grievance mechanism. Those 2 things don't coexist. On Thursday morning I called him. I said the unit was his if he wanted it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I wasn't sure you would." I said, "I wasn't either." That's the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Probably the most honest conversation we'd ever have. Neither of us dressed it up or pretended it was something other than what it was. 2 people who had a bad professional history, acknowledging it plainly, and deciding to try something different. He moved in on the 1st of November. Update 3, the tenancy, what actually happened. Month 1. He paid rent on the 28th of October. Early. 3 days early, to be exact, which I noticed with a feeling I couldn't immediately name. It was only later that I recognized it as a kind of mirror. I used to pay my rent early because I was scared. He was paying his rent early because he wanted to be the kind of tenant worth keeping. Maybe for the same reason I had been. Maybe not. I didn't ask. Month 3. I got a call on a Wednesday afternoon. He'd found a slow leak under the kitchen sink. He'd turned off the water valve himself, which most tenants don't know to do, put a towel down, and was calling to report it and ask when it could be fixed. Calm, specific, not an emergency but not ignoring it either. I had a plumber there within 48 hours. The fix cost $210. The leak, caught early, didn't damage the subfloor. If he'd ignored it or, worse, sent an angry text about it 3 weeks later, I'd have been looking at a much larger number. He sent me a text when the plumber left. Fast response. Good landlord. I read it 3 times. I don't know exactly what I felt. Something that was not quite pride and not quite vindication, something quieter than both of those. I had been trying to be a good landlord. Someone who had no particular reason to compliment me had just told me I was one. That mattered. Month 5. He knocked on my door on a Saturday morning. He asked if I had 20 minutes. We went and sat on the front stoop, the concrete steps leading down to the sidewalk, which is where Patricia sometimes sits in the evenings, and where Marcus occasionally nods to me when he's getting home from his second shift job. He said, "I know what I did to your position wasn't right. I was under pressure from above, and I made decisions I shouldn't have made the way I made them. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just wanted to say it." I looked at the street for a while. A dog went by with someone in running shoes. A kid on a bike. The ordinary Saturday morning texture of a neighborhood going about its business. Then I said, I know. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Not a warm reconciliation scene. Just acknowledgement, 2 syllables that meant, I hear you, and I'm not pretending the 11-minute meeting didn't happen, and I'm also not going to let it be the only thing between us forever. We sat there another few minutes in silence. Then we went back inside separately. Something shifted. Not repaired. You don't repair 9 years of professional relationship and 11 minutes of dismissal with a conversation on a stoop. But acknowledged. Moved from the category of unfinished business into something more like understood. The difference between a wound that's been ignored and one that's been cleaned. The second one can still scar. It just doesn't keep bleeding. Update 4, Month 8. The conversation I didn't expect. His consulting work picked up in Month 6. A supply chain firm brought him on for a project, then extended the contract. By Month 8 he had something resembling stable income again and the slightly different posture that comes with it, less careful, more forward-looking. He knocked on my door again on an August evening. He had 2 beers. He held one out and asked if I had time to sit on the stoop. We sat there for 2 hours. He asked me how I'd learned the real estate investing process. How I'd found the building. How I'd known what to look for. And I found myself talking, really talking, not the careful professional language we'd been using with each other for 8 months, but the actual story. The sleepless Tuesday night and the post-it note. The 8 months of podcasts and spreadsheets. The 64 models I'd built before I made a single offer. The inspection process, the offer negotiation, the particular way the numbers work on a 4-unit in a neighborhood like Northside versus the way they work somewhere else. He listened carefully. He asked good questions. He had, and I don't say this with any particular feeling, a genuinely sharp operational mind. He could see systems. He just spent a lot of years applying that capability to the wrong things, or at least to things that weren't his. At some point I realized I had been talking to him for 90 minutes about real estate investing, which was the thing I cared most about, and he had been genuinely engaged the entire time, which was not the experience I'd had in most meetings with him when he was my VP. I thought, people are different when they need something versus when they have everything. I thought, I wonder which version of him was always underneath. I didn't say either of those things. I told him about the house hacking math instead, and watched his eyes do the calculation, and watched him understand it the way people understand things that are both obvious and somehow invisible until the right moment. He said, why doesn't everyone do this? I said, most people don't run the math. And the ones who do get scared by it. He nodded slowly. He was quiet for a minute. Then he said, I got scared by a lot of things I shouldn't have. And made other people absorb the consequences. I didn't pretend I didn't know what he meant. I also didn't try to make it into more of a moment than it was. I said, yeah. We finished the beers. He went upstairs. I sat on the stoop alone for another 10 minutes watching the neighborhood settle into evening, and I thought about the particular strangeness of life, how it moves sideways when you're expecting it to move forward, and how sometimes the sideways turns out to be the direction everything needed to go. Update 5. The year mark, the renewal, the numbers. Month 12. He renewed his lease. He asked for a 15-month renewal instead of the standard 12. He wanted stability while his contract ran, he said, and he was happy with the building and the management. I said yes. We signed new paperwork. His daughter came by one Saturday to meet me because she'd been his co-signer and wanted to see the place her father was living. She was in her late 20s, sharp, a little protective of him in the way adult children sometimes are of parents who've been through a difficult period. She shook my hand. She looked around the apartment. She looked at me with a particular evaluating look of someone who has been doing a lot of quiet assessment. She said, he likes it here. I said, he's a good tenant. She seemed to decide something. She nodded once. Went back to her car. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. Let me give you the financial picture at month 14, because this is a real estate story and the numbers are part of what makes it true. All 4 units occupied at full rent. Monthly gross income, $3,955. Mortgage payment, $1,891. Property taxes and insurance, $610. Maintenance reserve at 10%, $395. Net monthly cash flow, $1,059. That's $12,708 per year in cash flow. Real money. Money that exists because I did the math and bought the building and made decisions based on what I wanted to build instead of what I wanted to feel. Northside appreciated. The neighborhood had been growing for several years and it kept growing, 8% in the 14 months since I'd bought the building. Estimated current value, $323,000 against a remaining mortgage balance of roughly $251,000. My equity, $72,000. Total net worth increase in 14 months. $72,000 in equity plus $14,800 in cash flow received equals $86,800. I am 39 years old. I have never had $86,800 in net worth growth in a single year in my entire life. I have never had $86,800 in net worth at all. I looked at the post-it note on my bathroom mirror. $318,000. The number that made me angry enough to do something. It was still making me angry. But the anger had changed shape. It had become something more like fuel than like wound, the specific energy of a person who understands a system and has decided to use it instead of be used by it. Resolution. What happened, and what I learned. Month 16, I did a cash-out refinance. Pulled $55,000 in equity. Started looking at my second property. I know what I'm doing now, not from podcasts and spreadsheets, though those are where I started and I'm grateful for them. I know it from 16 months of burst pipes and late applications and lease renewals and tenant conversations and a relationship with a building that is, in its quiet way, alive. Buildings need attention. They reward attention. They are not passive investments. They are ongoing agreements between you and the people who live inside them and the neighborhood that surrounds them and the systems, plumbing, electrical, structural, that hold them together. I know that now in a way I didn't when I was reading books. Month 18, he moved out. His daughter had bought a house nearby, a small 2-bedroom, good neighborhood, good price. She'd found it with some of the real estate knowledge she'd absorbed from listening to us talk on the stoop. She wanted her father closer. He was going to rent a room from her while he looked for something more permanent, maybe thought about buying himself now that his income had stabilized. He left Unit 2 clean. Cleaner than he'd found it, actually. He'd repaired a small crack in the bathroom tile with a tube of grout he'd bought himself and touched up a scuff on the hallway wall with paint he'd asked me for the color code on and matched himself. These are not things I asked him to do. These are things that a person does when they are trying to be good at a role they didn't expect to play. He left a note on the kitchen counter. Handwritten, on a piece of paper folded once. Left it better than I found it. Thanks for the chance. I read it twice. I stood in the empty kitchen of Unit 2 and I read it twice and I thought about the 11-minute meeting and the parking garage and the post-it note and the 64 spreadsheets and the conversation on the front stoop in May and the 2 beers in August and the 15-month lease renewal and the grout he'd bought himself. I kept the note. It's in the folder with the property documents now, between the mortgage statement and the inspection report, same place as the post-it note. Here's what I know. I spent 17 years being angry at landlords. Not all of them deserved it. Some of them were fine, professional, responsive. But enough of them weren't. Enough of them treated the relationship as extraction rather than exchange. Enough of them disappeared when things broke and reappeared when rent was late. Enough of them made me feel like a revenue line rather than a person. I spent 14 months becoming one. What I learned is this: the landlord I hated wasn't a type of person. It was a type of decision. The decision to not fix things promptly. The decision to take the money and be unavailable. The decision to screen tenants carelessly or not at all and then be surprised by the consequences. The decision to treat the relationship as one-directional. Money flowing in, nothing flowing back. I made different decisions. I fixed things within 48 hours. I screened carefully. I left long-term tenants' rents below market because their stability was worth more than the marginal income. I lived in my building and knew what it felt like to live there. I answered texts. I asked how things were going. My building runs well. My tenants stay. My cash flow is real. My equity is building. My second property analysis is underway. And the man who fired me in 11 minutes lived in my building for 18 months and paid his rent early every single month and left the unit cleaner than he found it and wrote me a note that I have kept in a folder between 2 important documents. I didn't plan that. I didn't engineer it. There was no revenge strategy. There was no confrontation. There was just an application, and a credit check, and a 3-day deliberation, and a phone call on a Thursday morning where I said the unit was his if he wanted it. I chose the landlord I wanted to be over the satisfaction I could have taken. I want to be honest that there was satisfaction available. It would have felt good for a week. Then I'd have had a vacancy and a story about a small victory, and neither of those things pay the mortgage or build equity or get you to a second property. I'm looking at a 6-unit building in Norwood now. The numbers look good. They usually do, if you're willing to do the math, and if you're willing to set the personal history aside and ask what you actually want to build. I'm getting better at both. The post-it note is in the folder now. Filed between the mortgage statement and the inspection report. $3,800. 17 years. 1 building. 4 units. 1 tenant I didn't expect. 1 conversation on a stoop in May. 1 note on a kitchen counter that said, "Left it better than I found it." That's the whole story. It's a real estate story, and it's a revenge story, and it's neither of those things, depending on when you start the clock. I started at 2:14 in the morning, with a Sharpie and a Post-it note and $318,000 in losses that turned into the most productive anger I've ever felt. Everything else followed from that.